Well, I'm happy to see that you are back in Chapter 8, Part 2, Section 8.5. Today we are going over Part C. For Part C, this is the only time we will spend an entire part of a chapter, an entire video on this. But for Part C, we are going to talk about solving the equation with factoring. We will be solving the equation in other chapters later after we've learned more factoring techniques. However, I'm not going to spend an entire section just about solving the equation other than this video. In order to solve an equation by factoring, or to finish solving the equation, we need to know what the zero product property is. Well, it says if the product of two factors is 0, then at least one of those factors must be 0. If you want to double check me and you don't believe me, think about it this way. 4 times what is going to be equal to 0? Well, that x has to be 0, right? Or you could say 152 times what will equal 0? Of course, the only answer is 0. You could try it with any number, anything that you would like. It should always be 0. What does that mean? How does that help us solve by factoring? Well, here are our steps. Step 1. Get all of your terms on one side of the equation. Set it equal to 0. Does that sound doable? Hopefully the answer is yes. You won't necessarily have to do this for every problem, but this is the first thing that we need to check. Is it set equal to 0? Or can I move things to get it equal to 0? All right, after you have it set equal to 0, go ahead and factor it. In other words, if you're factoring, it must have parentheses of some sort. Again, you might not have to do this for every single one that we go through. Not every practice problem are you going to have to factor. However, make sure that it is factored before you move on to step 3. And what is step 3, you say? Well, step 3 is going to set each factor equal to 0 and then solve with our inverse operations like we normally would. Just a note to self, these equations may have more than one solution. The probability is in your favor that it will have more than one solution. However, it may only have one. All right, 3 steps. Make sure it's equal to 0, factor it if it needs to be, and then set each of those factors equal to 0 and solve. Let's do a couple of examples. Let's start off with one of these nice, easy examples. Let's start off with number 2. Number 2, is it set equal to 0? Yep, set equal to 0. Is it factored all the way? Do I have my parentheses? Yep, got my parentheses. They're right here. That means I can go ahead and jump all the way to number 3 on our list. Set each factor equal to 0. Each set of parentheses is called a factor. So I can say d minus 5 equals 0, and 3d plus 4 equals 0. Once I have it set equal to 0, all I have to do is solve. So let's go ahead and solve this one first. D minus 5 equals 0. How do I solve that for d? I can add my 5 to both sides, and I will end up with d is equal to 5. Nice little one-step equation for you. Now let's look at our two-step equation. We have a 3d plus 4. Which do I want to get rid of first, the 3 or the 4? Well, of course, I want to get rid of the 4 first. So instead of the inverse operation, I have my negative 4, or subtract 4 from both sides. Don't forget, you do it on one side, you have to do it on the other, keep it equal. That would leave me with 3d is equal to a negative 4. Now, of course, to get rid of that 3, since it's attached with multiplication, my inverse operation is to divide. And I can divide both sides by 3. Cancels out, and I'm left with d is equal to negative 4 over 3. See how these skills that we learned earlier, not only in this chapter, but in this whole class, comes back and we use them over and over again? Seems true for all of math. All right, so we did example number 2. I have really strong faith that you can do example number 1 because they are both one-step equations. So let's move on. Example number, let's go ahead and look at example number 4. Example number 4. Make sure we're going through our checklist. First thing, is it set equal to 0? Nope, not quite. All right, how am I going to set this equal to 0? Well, a lot of you guys like your variable to be on the left-hand side. So let's go ahead and subtract 12y squared from both sides. If I subtract 12y squared from both sides on my right-hand side, they cancel out and I get a 0. On the left, we would have a 4y minus 12y squared. All right, step 1's done. It's set equal to 0. Step 2, factor it. So if I look at this, I have a binomial. And the only thing we know about factoring so far is for when we have 4 or more terms or pulling out greatest common factor. So, greatest common factor. If you are a prime factorization person, by all means, please hit pause. Otherwise, I can look at 4y and a negative 12y squared and say, okay, well, what they share in common, they can both be divided by 4. They both have y's, however, they only share one y. My greatest common factor is 4y. So if I was to factor that out, I'd have 4y, open some parentheses, and 4y times what gets me to a 4y? Well, I don't need to multiply it by anything extra. But I do still need to make sure that I have the right number of terms. So 4y times 1 is still 4y. Let's make sure we put that 1 in there. 4y times what will get me to a negative 12y squared? Well, I know it needs to be negative. I know 4 times 3 will give me 12. And I know in order to get to a y squared from y, I need to multiply by another y. Don't forget, once you're done factoring, bring down that equals 0. You can't lose him. If you don't have an equal sign, you don't have an equation. All right, we're done with step 1, setting equal to 0. We've gone ahead to step 2 and factored. Step 2 is done, so let's move on to step 3. Take each factor and set it equal to 0. Well, I know 4y equals 0 is one factor set equal to 0. My other one is 1 minus 3y. Set that equal to 0 as well. Now, if we go back a couple of chapters, let's go ahead and solve this. 4y equals 0. In order to get rid of that 4, we want to go ahead and divide by 4. We'll get a y equals 0. And over here on the other one, I have 1 minus 3y. I want to get rid of this positive 1 that's in the front first. Since it's a positive, the opposite is minus, so subtract 1 from both sides. I'm left with a negative 3y is equal to a negative 1. There's no symbol here, so I know my 3 is attached to my y by what operation? When there's nothing there, we assume it's multiplication. Inverse operation of multiplication is division, so let's divide by a negative 3 on both sides. And I will have y is equal to a negative 1 over a negative 3. I can't simplify those numbers at all, but a negative divided by a negative I know should give me a positive answer. Or I can chum that and make it a positive 1/3. So here's what I'm going to say. Once you're done and you have 2 answers, let's make sure you box those answers for us so that we can find both. Eventually later we'll tell you to write it in set notation and we'll go over what that is. But for now, let's just make sure that we have them boxed and we can find both of them. And just for the fun of it, should we do one more example? Now, let's not do another example. I think that you guys got it. Let's go ahead to our lesson summary. All right, lesson summary. If there are already parentheses in the equation, do you need to factor? Why or why not? So if you already see parentheses in there, do you have to go ahead and go through step 2, or can you just say, oh, awesome, they did it for me, check it off? And of course, we have our practice problem for you. Practice problem, we have 4x squared plus 6x equals 0. Make sure that you have that done, that you've at least at the bare minimum tried it and have a question ready to ask if you need to. Otherwise, I cannot give you your stamp and you will not get full points for watching this video. So let's make sure we don't forget those 2 squares. I hope that you learned something new today and have a great rest of your day.